So I've been waiting for a chance to try Datura for a while now. I read a lot about it and I thought I was ready for what's to come. I invited an old female friend over to spot me since she tried almost every drug out there, Datura not included. And after she got here, I told her not to let me smoke. Pour water down my throat if I seem not to manage to do it myself. Hell, I even had handcuffs ready for if I go berserk and try to attack her. I told her to check my pulse and temperature every once in a while and to call the hospital immediately if anything seems wrong. I then went and crushed about 0.25 teaspoons and mixed it with about 330 milliliters of water. I boiled it for a few minutes, let it chill, and drank it in small sips. I did not drink the seed leftovers though. So we sat and talked for about 20 minutes before it hit me. I thought that since I used such a small dosage, I'll be only mildly experimenting with it rather than fucking myself up, but was I wrong? At the beginning, I felt very nauseous, my guts hurt, and my mouth went dry. Since it was bearable, I decided to drink some Coke and try to let it pass. By now, I was hurting all over. My head started pounding as if I was in the sun too long and hadn't drank for a couple hours. The pain was overwhelming, but apparently my pulse was still within normal, because although my friend seemed rather worried, she did not call the hospital. I felt as if claws were closing on my stomach, but my head was somewhere else. Kind of a fainting feel. I'm out. I wake up in my bed a couple of days later, Saturday. My friend proved her friendship and stayed right next to me for the entire period of time. She said that for the first night, she cuffed me to my bed because she didn't want me to go to sleep when I'm like that. But then she said I was moaning, so she untied me. I wasn't violent, I wasn't moving. She said that I wasn't there at all. I was looking forward with eyes halfway open and entirely dilated. I wasn't mumbling most of the time, and I can't recall a thing. I kind of shriek sometimes. I did pee on myself, but I was ready for that, and covered my bed with plastic bags under the sheets. I was sweating like hell, but it was fairly hot. The only thing I remember was an occasional gag over a water bottle that was shoved in my face. I did not hallucinate that, and probably did not hallucinate at all. If I did, I cannot remember a thing of it. After I woke up, I still had a fever, but my pulse was perfectly normal. I did not bleed and did not die, but it did not feel like a trip. You can get the same response from drinking a nice glass of bleach. Don't. The most dominant pain was the stomach clawing. After that was the dryness, which was taken care of my good friend whose friendship I came to value even more. I couldn't see almost at all, but this calmed down rather quickly for me. I want to stress that this is not the commonly used Datura, but the kind that grows around these areas. This is just strictly poison. When I was 18, I was in a strange place in the world. I was homeless, penniless, and with no real ambition to pull myself out of the gutter. Although I was without the basic necessities of food and shelter, I had a steady supply of drugs that were dispensed, I suppose, out of sympathy by many of my friends. I went to sleep hungry and cold every night, but never sober. One evening, before I left a party to hit the streets to find a broom closet or a stairwell to lay my head, a guy I barely knew gave me a large freezer bag full of brown, spiky pods. What are these? Jimson weed. The seeds will make you trip. Maybe you can sell them. I don't want them. He told me to split the pod open and eat half of the seeds if I really wanted to trip hard. To me, that meant eat the whole pod since I always found recommended dosages to be unsatisfying. I chose not to dose that night since I already was tired and afraid that I might fall asleep before the trip kicked in. I slept in a building gutted by a fire a few years before, and the freezing November air woke me up just before dawn. I got up and walked into town to raise my body temperature and avoid hypothermia. This was my daily morning ritual. Obviously, 5 a.m. in a small city offers very little in terms of recreation, so I decided it was the right time to open the door of perception and begin my day with a psychedelic breakfast. I chose the largest pod in the bag, which was also the darkest in color. I was told afterward the most potent seeds are the deepest brown. The seeds were terribly bitter and many of the shells got stuck in my teeth. I managed to finish the entire pod with a little help from a public water fountain. I watched a beautiful sunrise from the roof of an apartment building, constantly waiting for the effects of the Jimson weed to take effect. I can't say how long I sat until the seeds started working, but the first noticeable signs came in the form of extreme thirst and general physical discomfort. Finding the feelings of dehydration was too strong to ignore. I went to a nearby McDonald's for free ice water. It must have been after 9 because the only people in the restaurant were old guys getting free refills on senior citizen discounted coffee. I sat in a booth in the back corner sipping water through a cracked straw, watching the thirsty elderly redneck parade. It didn't take long for me to realize I was entering into a very hallucinogenic trip. The fact that I hadn't eaten a real meal in a week and I was sleep deprived probably added to the drug's intensity, but I can't imagine a big dinner and full 8 hours would have made too much of a difference. Unlike the onset of an E or acid trip, my mental state was very comfortable, but my physical condition felt quite unhealthy. The heavy sense of inebriation was quickly followed by powerful, disorienting visuals. Though they were not disturbing, they seemed as clear as sunlight. Black cats milled about the floor in front of me, so numerous I couldn't even see the tile. They appeared wet and angry. There was a deep crimson blood dripping from the ceiling. Everything was technicolor. The sense of detachment was strong, but it didn't feel strange. Each hallucination flowed into the next. I was holding a very old Bible in my lap. I couldn't figure out how to open it. Soon, it started to leak blood. The more I struggled, the more it bled. As soon as I realized my efforts were futile, the book materialized into the air around me. It didn't seem strange to me. When I analyzed the room again, it was a bustling, futuristic metropolis. It appeared very large and very alien, with shining chrome and flashing lights everywhere. I began to feel discomfort and a strong urge to urinate simultaneously. I staggered into the bathroom and vomited in the closest urinal, right in front of an Amish man. Now, I live in South Central Pennsylvania, so it's very possible that he was really there, but considering my state and other people's accounts of Datura-induced visuals, I suspect he was just a hallucination. I do not know that I relieved myself somewhere in the bathroom and left through the side exit adjacent to the lavatory door. The street outside was a scene of World War II ravaged Europe. I don't know which country, but everyone on the street was garbed in a Nazi military uniform. I felt very threatened. I ran into the alley behind the parking lot and hid behind a pine tree. The anxiety soon ebbed, but the thirst and need to urinate returned. I knew I needed a comfort zone, a place I could relax in. A friend lived nearby. I walked to his apartment complex and stood in front of the stairwell. The same crimson blood from the McDonald's was cascading down the steps. It began to rise over my shoes, up my legs. A heavy sense of vertigo came over me. There's a memory gap between the stairs and my friend's apartment, but I ended up on his couch watching dolphins dive through the wall in a seamless loop. During my time there, I experienced the typical non-existent cigarette search and then the disappearing person puzzle. I visited the bathroom many times but eliminated very little. The sense of dehydration was unbearable. There was no comfort. I did not recognize the people in the room. I asked the person closest to me where Bill was. "Bill's not here," was the return. I closed my eyes to escape the growing sense of panic, but when my eyelids shut, all I saw was a new room with new people. Where was I? I tried to reopen my eyes, but it only revealed another room with yet more strangers. This went on and on. I didn't know if my eyes were open or shut. I didn't know where I was, what time it was, or what was even happening. My panic turned into a sensory collapse. Everything bled together and I felt a deep spiraling sensation engulf me. I lost all visual capabilities, but I still had a very real sense of touch. I was trapped in a small metallic box. It made perfect sense to me. I was dead. This was hell. There were no demons, no hellfire or brimstone, just a deep, complete feeling of darkness and hopelessness. This was the never-ending void. Not at all how I imagined it, but worse than I thought it could have been. I've had feelings of infinite emotion on acid trips and sensation of universal truth in K-holes, but this was the most profound reality I had ever experienced. My whole existence was put into perspective, and I was being punished for wasting the gift of life. I blacked out at some point in the box and woke up in my friend's apartment the next day. He said I was out for about 8 hours. The physical effects wore off about a day later, but the psychological impression has yet to fade. Datura is boundless. Datura is powerful beyond words. Datura is poison. He collected about 3 to 4 ounces of seeds one weekend. He was driving back with his friend and took 2 teaspoonfuls of seeds. After about a half an hour, he still wasn't feeling the effects, so he reached in the bag and grabbed a handful of seeds and started munching. His friend was, flabbergasted. This guy must have had any clue of what it would do to him. Well, 10 minutes later, he's feeling the effects a bit, just a bit of a buzz, and drops his friend, stoned out of his mind, at his house and goes to park the car. Friend forgets about him for about an hour, go figure, and this is what happened. He drove off and doesn't know where he was heading, but he ended up running his mom's brand new Audi into a tree at some apartment complex. He was still functional enough to realize that he knew someone who lived in the area and went to her house. When she opened the door, he was babbling about nothing at all and was just running off at the mouth. The girl was a friend and loaded him into her car and took him to his house and dropped him off in the street. He walked inside his house, maybe 1.75 hours after eating, and goes into his room, gets his boombox, and goes to the bathroom to take a shower. Strips down naked, gets in the shower, no water, gets out, takes radio downstairs, still naked, and starts cleaning, moving furniture, and dusting, etc. While his mom is sitting in the room trying to watch TV, she asks him what the hell he thinks he's doing. He replies, "God damn it, Mom, leave me alone. Can't you see I'm trying to take a shower? Damn!" Then he starts babbling again. Well, his mom called for the paramedics. He was lucky, pumped him full of some other drug, Thorazine maybe, fuzzy here, and pumped his stomach. Doctor said he was very lucky, maybe within an hour of death. Just thought I'd post this story, kinda funny, but very serious undertones. That shit messes with you. Set and setting aside, be prepared for a wild time. This is a report not about my own experiences, but rather the story of a friend who recently had a frightening ordeal with the seed pods of a Datura plant. Early this summer, this friend who we'll call Pat went on an extended, multiple-week vacation with his family to Florida. Pat is an upperclassman in high school and has a reputation of doing very stupid things with hallucinogens. Knowing he would be unable to drink or smoke pot during his vacation, Pat brought with him a full bag of Datura pods. One night, despite warnings his friends and even I had given him, he ate all the seeds from the 3 seed pods. An hour went by, and Pat didn't feel anything, so he ate another pod. From what Pat told me, the first hour or so of actual tripping was enjoyable and controllable. He spoke to friends who were actually still back in his hometown, and then they would leave the room and never come back. It's amazing how similar all of the accounts of Datura trips are in this respect. By this time, it was fairly late at night, and Pat's entire family was asleep. They were soon awakened, however, as Pat began screaming at the top of his lungs for his 2 younger brothers to shut up. Both of them were asleep in their beds, and there stood Pat, screaming at them, "Shut the fuck up and be quiet!" When his dad walked in, Pat freaked and darted into the bathroom. He began scrubbing the bathtub furiously, apparently trying to look sober. Pat's dad, aware that his son was obviously hallucinating, but unable to get him to admit what he took, drove Pat to the hospital. The doctors at the hospital didn't know what was up, and the drug tests were all negative. One of them came to the conclusion that a prescription medication Pat was taking had triggered the early onset of schizophrenia. The entire time Pat was examined, he was speaking to people who weren't there, and sometimes to himself out loud. Apparently this medication had been known to do that in patients with the right conditions for future mental illness. Pat spent the next 3 days in a psychiatric unit, although from his account he only realized where he was there on the 3rd day. For the duration of his time there, Pat had to be accompanied by a suicide guard as a precaution. On the 3rd day, as he was coming down, he got pissed off at another patient who was talking in Ebonics, so he screamed at him, "You aren't black!" As a result, Pat had to sit in the timeout room, a tiny room with padded walls, floors, and ceiling, for 20 minutes. Pat was very stupid with the Datura that he took, and it ended up ruining his vacation, costing his family thousands in medical bills, and landing him in rehab at the demand of his family. When he regained reality and told doctors the name of the plant that he took, surprise, surprise, they had never heard of it before. While it is a funny story in retrospect, I feel indirectly at fault. I was the one who told this kid where he could find the plants and what they did, on the week before his vacation. So, I have this friend, who will remain nameless, who informed my boyfriend and I about these seed pods growing on someone's front lawn near my high school. The first thing that came to my mind was, woo! Free hallucinogenics! He suggested that we smoke the plant or brew some tea with it. We decided it would be much easier to just eat a few of the seeds and see what happened. Day 1, October 27th, 2005. My boyfriend and I had experimented with the seeds the night before, but we felt no effects. He didn't want to bother with any further experimentation, but I, on the other hand, am a very curious person. I decided that maybe if I took a few capfuls of the stuff, I would have a better trip. Man, was I ever wrong. 4:30 p.m. I take a capful of the Datura seeds at my boyfriend's house, even though he kept telling me not to. We were just on our way to my apartment and I decided to take a capful on the way to the bus stop. 5:15 p.m. I'm laying on my bed watching TV with my boyfriend drinking Jones's soda when my head starts to feel funny. My body is all tingly and my head feels inflated. I'm also very, very thirsty from what I can remember. 5:20 p.m. I am delirious and the hallucinations have started to kick in. I thought I was back in my boyfriend's basement and I turned to him grabbing my guitar and said, "Okay, Chris, I gotta go home now." And to my surprise, he says, "But Mel, you are home." And I'm like, "Chris, that's not funny. I gotta get to class." I was now hallucinating that I was in front of my school and I was grabbing my guitar to go to class. 5:45 p.m. My boyfriend informs my mom that I have ingested Datura because he's so concerned about my hallucinations and my lack of ability to speak or even form words. We go outside while my mom calls the poison control center, and according to my boyfriend, I couldn't even hold my cigarette or stand up properly. My purse would continuously slip off my arm and my cigarette would keep falling out of my hand because my mind was no longer with me. 6 p.m. Poison control has reserved a space in the emergency room for me because I had ingested a poisonous substance which the hospital has heard little about. My mom makes me put my shoes back on, which wasn't easy. I kept putting 2 different shoes on because I was having trouble deciding which one was prettier than the other. 6:20 p.m. We are on our way to the hospital that is about 5 minutes from my apartment, and I'm nodding out in the front seat. When my mom parks the car, I'm passed out and worrying both her and my boyfriend as they frantically try to wake me up. We get into emergency and Chris sits me down in a wheelchair, where I began to pick the fluff off the sweater that the black lady sitting next to me was wearing. I was acting like a retard. I can't remember anything except for what my mom or boyfriend told me after this. Later that night, I'm in a room, an emergency, and I'm being restrained because I won't stay still so the staff can sedate me. My heart rate was soaring over the normal number. It was like my heart was running a marathon for 24 hours. After being sedated, my body is pumped with charcoal while my boyfriend stands next to me, but far enough away, like the doctor said, in case I threw up. Day 2, October 28th, 2005. I'm still sedated and remember nothing from the night before. I have been moved to the pediatric ward where I have my own room with a border of hockey players, a TV, and my favorite teddy bear. I leave my comatose state around dinner time, but I'm still experiencing strong hallucinations. 7 p.m. Daddy Daycare is on the TV, but I don't remember watching it. My boyfriend and mom are still with me and have been for the entire day. Neither of them knew whether I would come out of this without permanent damage to myself. My boyfriend had mixed my peas into my mashed potatoes for me, like I always do, and promised that he would stay with me no matter what happened. 7:10 p.m. I finished eating and I'm now capable of holding conversations with my mom and boyfriend. I supposedly performed an exorcism on my mom because I thought she was possessed. Her face kept morphing and bugs were crawling out of her eye sockets. There were also bugs crawling all over the floor of the hospital room as well. My boyfriend's logo on his shirt turned into a bunch of feathers. I saw a little puppy running around the room, and I kept seeing pixies and stars everywhere. Stars kept covering my hands, and I had to keep brushing them off. 8 p.m. My boyfriend's mom and his sister came to visit me, along with my grandfather. I was slowly returning to normal, but not quite. Only an hour or two before, I had come to the conclusion that while I was sedated, I was surgically given a penis. It was really a catheter, but I didn't know that. Zena, my boyfriend's mom, asked me about the hockey players on the ceiling, and I informed her that one of them was beating the crap out of the other, and there was a boat sailing by her. 8:20 p.m. 2 security guards came into my room as I wheeled myself around on the wheelchair, gaining the nickname Wheels from my boyfriend and grandfather. The security guards told us that I was being moved to a better room because a baby was being moved into the room I was in. I wanted Chris to push my wheelchair, but they wouldn't let him. They wheeled me to the basement of the hospital, right towards the psychiatric ward. I was totally confused. I didn't know why they were taking me there. I was so scared. 8:30 p.m. The woman working the night shift informs us that I'm staying here for a few days under observation, just to make sure that my hallucinations do stop and that I make it out okay. By then, I was only having mild hallucinations and knew exactly what was going on. They wouldn't let my mom or boyfriend stay overnight, and I started bawling because I was so afraid. They forced a sleeping pill on me, and since they had a smoking room down there, my mom had to get a doctor's note saying that even though I was under 18, I was allowed to smoke in there. 9 p.m. My mom comes back with a suitcase of pajamas, toiletries, makeup, etc., and tucks me into bed. A security guard sits on a chair in my room keeping an eye on me because I was the youngest, most sane person in the psychiatric ward. The chair was doing some shit out of Jumanji, and vines were coming out of it and stuff. Every time I blinked, it would go away and start all over again. Day 3, October 29th, 2005. I finally fell asleep around 10 o'clock that night and woke up well rested in the morning. I was still seeing barely visible insects crawling on the floor, but within an hour, all the hallucinations had finally stopped. I got up and took a shower and did my makeup to make myself feel better. I spent the morning watching TV until my family came to visit at visiting hours. Day 4, October 30th, 2005. After watching TV for a good 4 hours, I have one last visit with the psychiatrist who says I can leave as soon as my family arrived. I literally jumped for joy. I was finally getting out of that hellhole. I can finally go home. 2 p.m. My mom and boyfriend get to the hospital and I was already packed and ready to go. I flipped off the staff who had been hassling me for the entire duration of my admittance and made my way out. I got more and more excited the closer we got to the doors. I was like a kid making my way into a candy store. It was a beautiful day and it felt great to be alive. The 3 of us got back to my apartment and my mom and boyfriend told me everything that I've just told you guys. because I can't remember anything after putting my shoes on until watching Daddy Daycare. My mom also told me that the doctors said if I didn't go to the hospital, I would have went into cardiac arrest and died. That means I would have had my funeral on Halloween. I would have died Thursday, October 27th, 2005, and been buried on my favorite holiday, Halloween. Well, that is my story about how easy it can be to get carried away. Curiosity killed the cat, and it nearly killed me. Parts of my experience are humorous to look back on, but I did almost die.